Cast your mind back to the summer of 1973. Britain was in the grip of an economic storm, inflation spiraling, the miners' dispute gathering, the three-day week lurking around the corner, and yet on the floor of a Coventry engineering department, a small team, led by one of the most gifted chassis engineers in the country, was quietly completing work on something that would, within months, be described by the press as one of the most technically advanced production engines ever built for a family saloon car. Not a Ferrari, not a Porsche, a Triumph. The car was the Triumph Dolomite Sprint, and its engine was the world's first mass-produced multi-valve unit, 16 valves, in a 2-liter 4-cylinder, operated in a masterstroke of practical engineering by a single overhead camshaft rather than the twin-cam arrangement that most engineers assumed was the only way to do it. The result was 127 brake horsepower from a saloon car that cost £1,740. The BMW 2002 Ti, its most obvious German rival, cost approximately £1,000 more for similar performance. Motor Magazine's road test ran with the headline, "Britain leads the way," and they were right. The Dolomite Sprint won the British Saloon Car Championship in 1975. It took the manufacturer's title in 1974. It earned a Design Council Award in 1974 for its extraordinary cylinder head. It was the first British production car ever sold with alloy wheels as standard fitment. And it was killed, along with the entire Dolomite range. In August 1980, when British Leyland closed the Canley factory as part of a restructuring process that had nothing to do with the car's merits and everything to do with the organization's inability to manage what it owned. The replacement was the Honda-derived Triumph Acclaim, a competent, characterless machine that bore no engineering relationship whatsoever to anything Triumph had ever built. 4 years after the Dolomite ended, the Triumph marque itself was retired. Today we are telling the story of what might have been the most underrated British performance car of the 1970s and why it deserved a great deal better than the fate it received. Section 1. Britain and BMW. In 1972, the market, the Dolomite, was born into. To understand the Triumph Dolomite, you need to understand what BMW was doing to the European compact saloon market in the late 1960s, and what it meant for every British manufacturer watching from across the channel. BMW had launched the 2002 in 1968, and the car had immediately redefined what a small to medium family saloon was expected to be. It was compact and practical for adults, reasonable boot, but it handled with a precision and communicated a willingness to be driven hard that nothing else in its class, including the Alfa Romeo 2000, could match without costing considerably more. The 2002 became the template for the sporting compact executive saloon, and every manufacturer in Europe knew it. Triumph, in 1972, was a company operating within the vast, troubled, and frequently dysfunctional structure of British Leyland. It had been absorbed into Leyland in 1960, and had become part of British Leyland when that corporation was formed in 1968. Despite the corporate turbulence, Triumph retained an engineering culture of genuine distinction. Its Canley plant in Coventry was staffed by people who cared deeply about what they built and who, within the constraints of British Leyland's notoriously erratic management, consistently produced cars more technically interesting than their market position suggested they should be. The Dolomite was the culmination of a line of Triumph compact saloons, stretching back to the Triumph 1300 of 1965, codenamed Project Ajax, that had progressively evolved from front-wheel side drive to rear-wheel drive across a bewildering variety of body styles and engine options. The Dolomite itself was introduced at the London Motor Show in autumn 1971 and went into production in October 1972. It was styled by Giovanni Michelotti, the Italian designer whose relationship with Triumph stretched back to the TR4 and the Herald. It was built on a rear-wheel drive platform derived from the Triumph Toledo, with a 4-door saloon body that offered genuine practicality, 5 adults, a usable boot, a walnut veneer dashboard, Full instrumentation at a price that undercut the BMW and the Alfa by a meaningful margin. The first Dolomite used the 1,854 cubic centimeter version of Triumph's slant 4 engine, the overhead camshaft unit that the company had originally developed for supply to Saab for their 99 model. In the Dolomite, this engine produced 91 brake horsepower and gave the car a top speed of approximately 100 miles per hour. It was a capable, well-sorted car. Honest John's assessment that it offered performance, handling, and cabin comfort that compared well with more expensive competition was a fair summary of how the contemporary press received it. But against the BMW 2002, which in its TI fuel-injected form produced 130 brake horsepower and had established the sporting saloon template that everyone was now chasing, the sporting standard Dolomite was at a disadvantage. Something faster was needed. Section 2 Spen King and the 16-valve engine, how Britain led the way. The Dolomite Sprint was the answer to that disadvantage, and the engineering story behind it is one of the most remarkable in the history of the British motor industry. Triumph's chief engineer, Spen King, the man who would also be responsible for the original Range Rover, and who stands as one of the genuinely distinguished engineers that British Leyland produced, identified the slant 4 engine as the platform on which a genuinely competitive performance version could be built. The capacity was increased to 1,998 cubic centimeters. Larger twin carburetors were fitted. But the key innovation was the cylinder head, and for that King turned to Harry Mundy. Mundy had worked on engine development at Jaguar and was one of the foremost valve train engineers in Britain. Working with King and drawing on expertise from the engineers at Coventry Climax, the company responsible for some of the most successful racing engines of the 1950s and 1960s, including the power units used by Cooper and Lotus in Formula One, Mundy developed a cylinder head that contained 16 valves, arranged in 2 rows of 8, all operated by a single overhead camshaft, rather than the twin-cam layout that conventional engineering wisdom considered necessary for a 16-valve design. The solution was elegant in its complexity. The inlet valves were operated directly by the camshaft lobes, acting through bucket tappets, while the exhaust valves were operated through rocker arms from the same camshaft. The inlet valves were 1.38 inches in diameter, the exhaust valves 1.21 inches. The camshaft itself was positioned between the 2 rows of valves, inclined at 27 degrees. The result was a design that achieved multi-valve performance with single-cam manufacturing costs and single-cam maintenance accessibility, a genuine piece of engineering ingenuity that had no direct precedent in mass production automotive history. The Dolomite Sprint has been described in the automotive press as the world's first mass-produced multi-valve car. That claim requires some precision. Multi-valve engines had appeared in racing and low-volume specialist cars before the Sprint, the Cosworth BDA, the Nissan S20, the Lotus 907, but the Sprint was the first to use a 16-valve head in a mass-production family saloon built to normal commercial volumes. The Design Council Award in 1974 recognized this achievement formally. On the test bench, prototype Sprint engines exceeded every expectation, producing 150 brake horsepower, 15 horsepower, beyond the original target of 135. The production line could not consistently build the engines to the same standard, and the final production figure was settled at 127 brake horsepower at 5,700 revolutions per minute, with 122 pound-feet of torque at 4,500 revolutions per minute. This was the right decision for longevity. The production figure allowed the engine a comfortable working margin, even though the name Dolomite Sprint replaced the originally planned Dolomite 135, precisely because the 135 brake horsepower target proved elusive in series production. The Sprint also received a gearbox and rear axle derived from the Triumph 2000 and TR cars, considerably more robust than the units used in the standard Dolomite, and was offered with a close ratio 4-speed manual as standard, with optional overdrive, which became standard fitment from May 1975, and optional Borg, Warner, automatic. A limited slip differential was available as a further option. Front disc brakes, with uprated pad materials and larger rear drums, managed the performance. And the Sprint was delivered with cast alloy road wheels as standard, the first British production car ever to offer this, a detail that seems minor in retrospect but carried considerable prestige significance at the time. The first 2,000 cars were finished in mimosa yellow Triumph's corporate sports car color, with a black vinyl roof, full-length body stripes, and a front spoiler. The visual effect was striking. The initial price at launch, delayed by a year from the planned 1972 introduction due to industrial unrest, was £1,740, against the BMW 2002 Ti at approximately £740 more, and the Alfa Romeo 2000 GTV at a similarly elevated price. The Sprint's value proposition was, by any measure, exceptional. Section 3, the press and the public, what they said and why they were right. Motor Magazine's road test of the Dolomite Sprint was subtitled, "Britain Leads the Way," and the summary that appeared in the magazine in 1973 reflects the genuine excitement that surrounded the car at launch. The Sprint must be the answer to many people's prayer. It is well appointed, compact, yet deceptively roomy. Performance is there in plenty, yet economy is good, and the model's manners quite impeccable. Most important of all, it is a tremendously satisfying car to drive. Motorsport magazine's road test of October 1973, conducted by the magazine's respected editor, W. Body, was equally enthusiastic. The Triumph Dolomite Sprint is a thoroughly likable and unexpectedly fast compact saloon with which I could be very content if buying a car in this price bracket. It should become one of Triumph's most popular models. Body specifically noted its price of £1,740 and observed that comparisons with more expensive German cars, while invited by the car's performance, were in his view odious and detract from the very real excellence of the Triumph, which is a fine car in its own right. The performance the press were describing was genuine. The Sprint reached 119 miles per hour at the top end. 0 to 60 miles per hour took 8.4 seconds. These figures placed it meaningfully ahead of the Ford Escort RS 2000, which the Sprint outsold significantly in terms of power, despite costing roughly comparable money and within reach of BMW and Alfa machinery at nearly double the price. The four-door body and generous equipment levels made the comparison with those German and Italian cars even more compelling from the perspective of a young professional choosing a company car. The Sprint also came with what Triumph described as a traditional interior that was, in fact, rather better than that word implies. The walnut veneer dashboard was the same design used in the Triumph Stag. Full instrumentation included oil temperature, water temperature, and an ammeter, alongside the speedometer and rev counter. Wood door cappings matched the fascia. The seats, finished initially in black brushed nylon and described by Motorsport as rather clinging, were genuinely comfortable for extended journeys. The overall impression was of a car that had been assembled by people who understood what buyers in this segment wanted and had delivered it without the typical British Leyland tendency to underspecify. Section 4, on the track, how the Sprint won and what it proved. Triumph's decision to campaign the Dolomite Sprint in the British Saloon Car Championship from 1974 onwards was the logical consequence of a car that, in standard road trim, was already performing at a level that justified competition. The homologation into FIA Group 1 on the 2nd of January, 1974, required that 5,000 cars had been built in the first 12 months, a figure the production line had just managed in 1973. The competition program was run by Broadspeed, the Coventry-based race preparation firm headed by Ralph Broad, with two principal drivers, Andy Rouse and Tony Dron. Rouse, who would go on to become one of the most successful British Saloon Car Championship drivers of all time, was at this point in his early career and brought a methodical engineering intelligence to the development of the car, alongside his driving abilities. The 1974 season was competitive from the outset. Rouse and Drawn placed the Sprint 5th overall at the Spa 24-hour race in July. In September, Drawn placed 3rd overall in the RAC Tourist Trophy at Silverstone, behind two V8 engine Chevrolet Camaros. The manufacturer's championship came to British Leyland in 1974, an achievement that the Broadspeed team considered the foundation for greater things. In 1975, Andy Rouse won the British Saloon Car Championship outright, not just the 2-liter class, outright, against larger engine machinery from Ford and other manufacturers. This was not a marginal or fortunate result. Rouse's pace throughout the season confirmed what the road tests had suggested, that the 16-valve engine in the hands of a skilled driver was capable of performances that belied its modest displacement. 1977 produced perhaps the Sprint's most dramatic single season. Tony Drawn, back as the Broadspeed driver after Rouse's departure, won 7 of the 12 championship races outright. 7 from 12, against the field. He was leading his class by over a minute in the final race of the season, when a tire failure ended his run. The championship slipped away by the narrowest of margins. A cruel result, but a result that confirmed that in 1977, 5 years after the road car had been launched, the Sprint remained the fastest car in its class on a British racing circuit. The Broadspeed campaign ended in 1978. By that point, corporate attention within British Leyland had shifted to the TR7, and subsequently to the development of the Rover SD1 and the Austin Allegro replacement. The Sprint continued in production for road customers until the Canley closure in 1980, but without factory motorsport support it was, commercially and reputationally, already entering its twilight. Section 5. Why Leyland killed it, and what it cost. The question posed in our title today is not a complicated one to answer, though the answer is deeply unsatisfying. British Leyland killed the Dolomite because it closed the Canley factory in August 1980 as part of a rationalization program forced on the company by years of financial losses, industrial disputes, declining market share, and the nationalization process that followed the Ryder Report of 1975. The Ryder Report, commissioned by the Labour government to assess whether British Leyland was worth rescuing with public funds, resulted in the de facto nationalization of the company and a management structure of extraordinary complexity. Its principal recommendation was consolidation, fewer models, fewer factories, fewer competing nameplates within the same corporation. The Triumph marque was not a priority within this logic. The Dolomite's competitors were not BMW and Alfa Romeo, as Triumph's engineers had intended, but the Austin Princess and the Morris Marina cars built in the same organization, by the same shareholders, for different corners of the same declining market. Giovanni Michelotti had proposed a replacement Dolomite in the late 1970s, a design based on the Sprint platform that resembled a Fiat 132 and incorporated a squared-off front with what was described in period as a BMW-style styling kink. At least one full-size example was built. British Leyland's management refused to fund it. There was simply not enough money. The Sprint's total production, across its run, from 1973 to 1980, was 22,941 cars, a modest figure by any commercial measure, though creditable for a vehicle in its price bracket and with its level of engineering ambition. Total Dolomite production across all variants exceeded 177,000 cars, making the range one of Triumph's better-selling post-war saloon lines. None of that mattered to a rationalization process that was counting factories and assembly lines rather than model quality or engineering merit. The replacement was the Triumph Acclaim, which arrived in October 1981, a Honda Ballad built under license at the BL plant in Cowley. It was a perfectly adequate small car. It had nothing whatsoever to do with anything Triumph had ever built. In terms of engineering originality, it represented the complete antithesis of everything the Sprint had stood for. 4 years later, the Triumph name was formally retired by British Leyland, and the sign above the factory in Coventry Spitfire Close, Herald Avenue. Dolomite Avenue remained as the only monument to what had once been produced there. The Triumph Dolomite Sprint was, in the most literal sense, ahead of its time. Its 16-valve engine, designed through a collaboration between one of Britain's finest chassis engineers, one of its most gifted valve-trained specialists, and the technical heritage of Coventry Climax's racing engine program, pioneered technology that the entire industry would eventually adopt as standard. Toyota, Honda, BMW, Volkswagen, every major manufacturer now builds 16-valve, four-cylinder engines. The Sprint built the first mass-production one in 1973, at a price that made the BMW 2002 look expensive. It won the British Saloon Car Championship outright. It came within a tire failure of winning it again in 1977. It earned a Design Council Award for Engineering Innovation. It was the first British car sold with alloy wheels as standard. Motor Magazine called it, at launch, the answer to many people's prayer, and, when its manufacturer finally closed the factory in which it was built, the replacement was a rebadged Honda. The Dolomite Sprint deserved better. Not because it was perfect, the overheating reputation it acquired, however unfairly based on maintenance neglect rather than fundamental design fault, damaged sales in a market that had little patience for temperamental British cars in the 1970s. But because its engineering achievement was genuine, its competitive record was real, and the people who built it were trying to do something worthwhile in extremely difficult circumstances. Today, surviving examples are genuinely rare. According to the How Many Left register, only approximately 420 Dolomite Sprints were taxed and road legal in the United Kingdom in 2025. Good examples command figures in excess of £30,000, a recognition, decades late, of what the car actually was. The best Sprints are being sought, restored, and driven by people who understand both the technical achievement and the human story behind it. Now we want to hear from you. Did you own a Dolomite or a Sprint? Perhaps your father drove one as a company car in the 1970s, or you remember one on the street outside your house. Do you have a view on whether British Leyland got the decision right, or whether closing Canley and ending the Triumph Saloon program was the single most avoidable mistake the company made? Tell us in the comments below. If this video has been worth your time, please give it a like. It genuinely helps us reach the audience that shares this passion for the British cars that tried hardest and were let down most completely. And if you are not yet subscribed, please do that now. There are many more stories ahead. Thank you sincerely for watching.